Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark and Sharon Schwartz, and we're looking at a passage from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And I'm just going to read verse 4. You can read the other verses for today. But it says, he said, "Dear woman, that's not our problem." Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." So the context is they run out of wine at the wedding. And so I want to know something. When Jesus told his mother, "Woman, that's not our problem. My time has not yet come," was Jesus being rude? Because to me, it sounds like he's being rude, Sharon.
Yeah, it's not the first time I've heard that angle. I don't think Jesus was being rude, but I think there was a better question to ask. I think the better question is what was on Jesus' mind. Let's ask the question what people might typically think when they go to weddings. There are some surveys that suggest that dancing and talking with people and witnessing this beautiful new love between a bride and groom are the most important things. There's other surveys that talk about the cost of a wedding. I'm sure that's the father of the bride surveys mostly.
Do you know how much an average wedding costs in
I would guess about $25,000,
I'm
$30,000.
gonna guess closer to 40 grand.
It's north of 30, yeah.
Yeah, I would guess 35. Yeah. Thank God Carrie got married during COVID.
So nobody could come.
Yeah, we had very small. Yeah. And I think some people might think about their own wedding and the memories, or the memory, if they're not married, of the wedding that'll happen in the future. I think it's a fantasy.
Yeah, I don't think he was being rude per se, as much as the fact that he was preoccupied. He made reference to "my time has not yet come," and there are several passages of Scripture that give us some insight to that, because ultimately when he's making this statement, "My time's not yet come," he's talking about toward what will be the end of his ministry, when he suffers, he's persecuted, he dies, his resurrection, all those things. John 7:30 says the leaders tried to arrest him. No one laid a hand on him because his time had not yet come. He knew he was operating according to God's timetable. And to use that term, his time had not yet come, there were other things he needed to be doing, so he was focused on that. Let me share another one with John 12:23. Jesus replied, "Now the time has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory." And that's right before all of those events take place, that ultimately where he gives his life for us. And in John 17:1, says, "And after saying all these things, Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, the hour or time has come. Glorify your Son so he can give glory back to you." And so in this, because you can read that on the surface and you're like,
he was short.
Yeah.
That may be wash out your mouth with soap.
Yeah, because I grew up in a home that if you were too direct or too short, there were severe consequences attached to that. But I think the reality is it's a preoccupation with what that time meant to him. And he was saying there's really a sequence of events that God has a plan, and I'm focused on following that, not necessarily responding to what your present situation is.
It seems that what he's thinking about is suffering is contradictory to what's going on, the wedding.
The celebration, yeah.
Right. And ironically, the suffering of Jesus would be necessary for there to be a wedding, right? For us to be the bride. He's frequently described as the bridegroom. John 3:29 says, "The friend of the bridegroom rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice." Matthew 9:15 says, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them?" Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 5, he describes Jesus' love for the church as a groom preparing his bride. And then in Revelation chapter 19, it says, "The marriage supper of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready." And, it's interesting. Weddings are universally kind of seen as these joyful, beautiful events. But Jesus' suffering was going to be the exact opposite of something beautiful, at least in the natural. Right, Sharon?
Yeah, you're right. Weddings, the bride and groom are celebrated. The setting is perfectly prepared. It's a moment of love and hope and new beginnings. But for Jesus, his wedding would become an would come at an unspeakable cost. His preparation wasn't joyous, it was suffering. His wedding attire wasn't elegant, it was a bruised and bloody body. Instead of guests celebrating, they mocked and they beat him. Instead of vows of love, he was betrayed. At a normal wedding, the groom offers vows. At Jesus' wedding, he offered his life. At a normal wedding, there's a celebration with wine, and at Jesus' wedding, there was blood poured out. At a normal wedding, the bride is radiant. At Jesus, he was beaten and unrecognizable.
Yeah, I think it would probably do us good moving forward when we go to weddings to try to intentionally think about Jesus and what was going on at this place, this wedding at Cana. Not that we shouldn't celebrate with the bride and the groom, the family, and the festivities, but I think as believers, we should pause long enough to think about what Jesus was thinking about his suffering and ultimately his death and his sacrifice on our behalf. And weddings will take on a whole different meaning for us if we do that.
Yeah. On a humorous note, I have been to some weddings and officiated
That was
some
suffering?
That you knew.
I knew it was going to be.
Yeah.
Right, I knew this was a crucifixion out of the gate, right? But
Sacrificial.
somebody is going to wish they were dead here before too long, right? But I do think now I've done more than 100 weddings at this point now. Some of the most beautiful moments in a wedding are communion, feet washing, right? I've seen that takes it away from the moment and makes it a little bit more spiritual, right? So how does it affect you to think about Jesus' sufferings in the context of becoming your bridegroom?
I love it because to me, it showed he gave his total self for his bride. There was nothing he wasn't willing to do for his bride. There was no humiliation he wasn't willing to face. There was no pain he wasn't willing to face. It was so unselfish. And I think as a woman, the idea of that takes my breath away. That someone is willing to say no to everything his flesh wants, to be everything I need.
The price he paid. We talked about expense of weddings, but think about the price that he paid in giving his very self and the struggle and that process that he went through to make that happen. How can we not be humbled by that and by his forgiveness and grace toward us?
Yeah, and it's dangerous for us to do it, but we still do it because it's how we relate. But I think about the sacrifices my spouse has to make just to be my spouse, right? And the sacrifices I have to make just to be her spouse. And they pale in comparison to the sacrifices Jesus had to make for me to be his, bride. Do you ever think about the cost of your salvation and wonder whether it was too high a price? And
I'm sure glad it was paid.
Well, the thing I say, and I said this when I preached on salvation, if I was God, and I'm not, I sent that message to somebody this morning. They were like, the God you're serving, that's what they were saying, the text. The God you're serving is not God, because he went on to talk about how if you went out and saw your kids, you wouldn't kill your kids, but God kills his kids, is what the Bible says. I said, here's the whole problem. You're trying to make God in your image. Yeah, right. That's right. That's the whole problem. You're trying
he's so much bigger than you.
You're trying to imagine God in your image. That's not how God thinks. Right. He's God. He's God for a reason, right? And if I was God, the minute Eve ate of the fruit of the tree, I wouldn't have given her a chance to get to Adam.
Right.
I would have squashed her.
Right.
And said, hey, bud, she disappeared. Let's make you another one. Yeah. You got a new model coming out, right?
How do you feel about a redhead this time?
I would have squashed it, and we would have started over. That wasn't God's plan. It wasn't his plan from the beginning. But if I was God, there wouldn't have been the price to pay. We would have just sacrificed. The one that would have got sacrificed would have been Eve, and we'd have started over again. But that wasn't his plan, and so sometimes Sometimes the answer is yes, I believe the price was too high.
But isn't it wonderful that that gives me so much happiness and joy that I'm worth that price. Because you're right. I'd have squished even than the next one and the next one, and
he'd have been married a lot of times.
He'd have been married, or Adam would have messed up, one or the other.
I mean, let's be honest, right? Could we? I mean, there's a lot of theological questions you can ask here. He could have squashed Satan. He didn't have to cast him into outer darkness.
No, he could have eliminated.
He could have just said, "You're annihilated," right?
But that's why our love and our choice means so much to him. And he knew it, and that Jesus agreed to it.
Mm-hmm.
He agreed to it.
I was thinking in a different realm after you talked about the price that Jesus paid, and he certainly did. But I began to think about, as in context of forgiveness, our theme for the week, of Moses with the children of Israel. And God did get to a point where he was ready to wipe them out, just be done with them and start all over again. And yet it was Moses who pled their case to God, asking him to pardon them, forgive them. And the fact that Moses forgave them so many times when they had neglected him and called into question his authority and stuff. And I'm like,
but by the time this comes out,
the
blog will be out, but it's for this week as we're recording. I'm fascinated right now by Moses, because we're still in the Pentateuch. We're reading as we're reading our daily Bible reading, at least right now while we're recording, we are. And many times on their behalf, not once, multiple times he intercedes on their behalf. One time he slips up, right? And God puts him out.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that's what I wrote about this week. The thing that intrigues me about that is he didn't check out.
Right.
God told him long before he was done that he was done.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Most of us would have said, yeah, well,
I'm
if
done.
I ain't going to the promised land, y'all on your own. And if he wants to kill you, let him kill you. Right.
Yeah.
But he didn't. Mm-hmm. He stayed engaged. He stayed interceding on their behalf. He continued to forgive them. He continued to lead them even when they were rebellious and complained and griped. He stayed engaged, which is an incredible mark of forgiveness on his point. I mean, I'm fascinated by it. So forgiveness is a big issue. I could say in most marriages, not a lot, most. Talk about what Jesus had to forgive even before he proposed to the church. What did that look like?
Well, the whole issue of sin, as we talked about, goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, and has been a problem ever since. And we see throughout the entire Old Testament, prior to Jesus, there was still provision. God's love, grace, and mercy was still available. It looked differently, but it all pointed to the time when Jesus would come, and then things would change moving forward. And so even before I was ever a part of the equation or part of his master plan or provision, he had demonstrated for thousands of years and countless people his grace, love, and mercy and forgiveness have been extended, to which all of us he desires us to be a part of his family, the bride, the church.
But I think we were part of his master plan before he ever said, let there be light. I stand in awe. I talk about this all the time with the kids at church. Before he said, let there be light, he looked at me and all the things I was going to do and said, she's worth it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pursue her. I'm going to court her. I'm going to propose. And she's going to be my bride. Knowing what I was going to do to him, he still pursued me. I don't know how many people would do that humanly, if you're in a really bad situation, a marriage that you'd rather be dead. If you had known that, would you still proposed? And he did. He still, and he knew the result, he knew but
I've counseled people not to get married for a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I've said, hey, nah, you probably shouldn't follow through with that. You probably should run fast as you can.
Run, turn.
But he didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us on Monday as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.